UFOs and religion. Is there a connection between these two words? Well, some say there is and some deny it. But is there a more sinister, even a demonic agenda behind the topic of UFOs? Our guests are here today to help answer those questions and more right now. Hello, everybody, and welcome to SkyWatch Television. I'm Joe Artis Horn. How many of you were here last week, had your minds absolutely shattered? The expectation that you had around the conversation of something like the Book of Revelation or the topic of UFOs, and your paradigm was kind of messed with a little bit. In just a minute, I'm going to introduce two brand new books from Defender Publishing, and we're going to talk about today's topic of conversation. But first, let me introduce the special guests. He's an avid Bible researcher and speaker who holds degrees in both biblical studies and business, Tyler Gilreath. And he's an expert on national security and foreign affairs whose service includes working on multinational programs for the Department of the Army at the Pentagon, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis. I want to introduce a couple of brand new books that are available now through the SkyWatchTelevisionStore.com that have been put out by Defender Publishing via our authors and special guests today. But a quick backstory, if you missed last week, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis shared a personal story that actually I was not even aware of that dated back to his motivation to write the brand new book, Out of This World, Are UFOs, Alien Spirits, or Pure Hokum? And it dates back to a request that my father actually placed on him. Bob, would you write this book? After Bob was on Fox News and my father read the article. And he was so blown away, he asked Bob, would you please take what you've said in just a few moments and basically amass this into a body of work that now resides in this fascinating book. Another topic of discussion that we're going to be covering in the next couple of weeks, brand new from Defender Publishing, is Tyler Gilreath's Gate of the Gods, Revelation, the Messiah and the Second Coming of Babylon. We did just a bit of teasing last week on what this book is about, didn't we, Tyler? Just a taste.
Just a taste, a small taste.
Just a taste, setting the table. I want to start with you today, Bob. For those that missed last week, go back to the archives because we talked about UFOs, UAPs, and some of the layers of how people out there in media aggregate these conversations typically constitute reading what others have kind of written, or they'll listen to a series of podcasts. And sometimes I'll use the word redundant or monotonous. The new television series or the new docuseries that's on Netflix or what tends to kind of borrow and recycle. And what more can you say after all of these decades about the conversation of UFOs? But ladies and gentlemen, Bob has taken the reveal on this subject next level. This is, I think, one of the elephant in the room topics, Bob. Christians are vastly unprepared for what is coming. When people hear the term UFO or UAP, those tend to signal different things to different people. What are those terms for the layperson or the person watching this program if they've kind of dismissed them as this giant body of sci-fi films, et cetera? And what do they actually mean in terms of how they should resonate with mankind here in 2024?
Unfortunately, Joe, a lot of Christians don't believe that the Bible's correct, that spirits are real and that they're engaged in our lives. They prefer the occult, or they prefer to believe that aliens are coming from outer space. And the more religious you are, of course, you tend to dismiss some of that. But those that are secularized by this culture are embracing this wholeheartedly. And that's why Hollywood is taking off with it. And there are a lot of materials out there. And this is especially in the last 70, 80 years. We have UFO religions. We have UFO cults. Mm-hmm. And what do they have in common? I go through 6 entities or 6 characterizations. They believe in extraterrestrial beings, even though that's probably very hard to accept, and I go through all the science behind that. They emphasize the relationship aliens have with humans. They talk about the series of encounters they have communication-wise, whether it's projections or means of communication. They talk about the aliens visiting Earth. and how they've interfaced with them. They talk about the coming millennial age and the advent of aliens, the Antichrist, they would argue, perhaps. And then, of course, the arrival. How are we preparing for the arrival of aliens? Even the U.S. government hosted, some studies on that, a couple of them. Other governments have as well. This is a cauldron of confusion out there.
Sure.
For those that are not tuned in to what the Bible says about spiritual beings and so forth, they grasp at this. And that is unfortunately behind a lot of the very evil things that are happening in this world, because we have so many demons that are intermixed in the things that are going on today.
You talk about UFOs from antiquity.
Yes.
What are some examples of those, and what are some common characteristics between ancient UFOs and the ones that people describe as seeing in the sky today, or photographing with their cell phones, or uploading video, or drawing illustrations of?
Yeah, I talk about Christian art, for instance, in the Middle Ages and Reformation era. And you look at some of these pictures, they see things like flying saucers.
For sure.
And it's all in the midst of a very understandable biblical scene. The Virgin Mary there getting the revelation of that she's going to be the mother of Jesus Christ. There's a host of this all over the world. The whole concept that the Bible is very clear that God is perfect. He can create anything he wants. But if you believe, like some of these scientists, that from inorganic matter you create through evolution mankind in these exoplanets that are light years away, and that somehow they're going to develop and then they're going to come to us and so forth. That takes far more faith than anything I read in my Bible. And yet that's where the science fiction is really taking the culture. And unfortunately, even in the church, it's been contaminated by that thinking. They've completely dismissed. They see God as incapable, that God is powerless. God is not the God of the Bible that I understand. And, churches are doing that too. So we need to get away from that, understand who our Father is, the creator of the universe. Even the rabbis that are really tuned into this say, yeah, God can do what God wants to do.
Yeah.
But spirits are very real, very real. And unfortunately, most Christians don't believe it.
Amen to that. I studied biology, of course, when I was at IU. You had to take several evolution classes, and you had to spout their line.
Yeah.
They're starting to move away from that. Many scientists, many believers in evolution, and they're going towards intelligent design. And I think Christians are jumping on that and saying, hey, they're finally believing in creation. Not really.
What a pitfall.
This is the idea that something from the outside came in and designed human beings either from something that was already here or from scratch. And the idea that any creator is the divine watchmaker. He made it all, he designed the watch, and he left. And he doesn't care.
That fits right in with the ancient aliens hypothesis, that the gods of ancient Mesopotamia were just space travelers who came to Earth and tinkered with the DNA of monkeys to turn us into humans as a slave race.
Right.
It's bunk. There's no evidence for it, but that gets back to your point that this is a religion. This is a science fiction religion for the 21st century.
Not too many people have gone to ancient Babylon, and there's ruins there. And I flew in on a CH-47 years ago with armed guards because it's not a safe place. But you look at the markings and there's carvings in ancient Babylon. You see this stuff that you just described, Eric, and yet it's prevalent today. We live in a world that is captivated by these alien ideas that are completely contrary to what God has told us. Spirits are real, and unfortunately, we ignore it.
And it's setting us up to worship these entities when they show up. You write about it in your book, that ancient Babylon, these ancient gods that were sent here by the Lord to help humankind, instead became those, we want worship. We like humans worshiping us. And they want it now. And if you think this world is just governed by humans, think again. It is governed by the entities, the watchers behind them.
There's new stories out that Italians and Greeks are now returning to the old religion of the Greco-Roman pantheon and worshiping Zeus, Jupiter, Apollo, Aphrodite,
Well,
Venus.
it's all over Washington, D.C.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. It's the empire that never ended.
Yeah.
But our good friend Carl Tykrib, who's done a lot of research into what pagans believe, has attended an annual gathering called Paganacon, every year for the last several years. And he says he's hearing from these practitioners of these old religions that the gods are appearing to them now, these pagans say, and demanding the rebuilding of their temples. I guess they're getting tired of meeting at the conference room at the Holiday Inn. But it's a serious thing. These gods are real. The early church knew it. They knew that Apollo and Zeus and Ares, Mars were real, just fallen angels. We've lost that over the last 1800 years.
You're right. It goes back to around 400. Augustine was very influential. He wrote a volume of works called The City of God. And ever since that, everything supernatural was kind of dismissed, ran out of the church. Sure. And now, a lot of this pagan and iconography is coming on the rise. And the sad thing is, Christians have the answer. The answer is in the Bible. We can have the dialogue and the discussion with anybody from any religion. I've taken that opportunity several times. I talked with an individual that dismissed the God of the Bible. They believed in the Greek gods, and I said, well, let's have a conversation. And I was able to talk with that individual and help them understand the bigger picture. But until Christianity embraces what God has so freely put forth, there are supernatural entities that are in and out of this world. They are influencing, they have been leading the nations astray into darkness. Until we embrace that, then we are really putting ourselves in a disservice, and we're not furthering the kingdom of God. We have the answer, and I'm glad you talk about in your book the things that the government is now talking about, having hearings, and it is now on news channels, and people are tuning in.
I'm glad you brought that up, Tyler. Why now, Bob? Why is Washington releasing this information now?
Well, they were compelled to. For 40 years, there was a gap and nothing was being done, and there was silence. And all of a sudden, we have people that are frustrated. Now, I would argue it's because, as I wrote for Defender years ago, The Deeper State, the things that I put in there, I'm fascinated by God's revelation telling me what to write. I talked about the Bohemian Grove. The Bohemian, I know people, very, very senior people that go there. What this is a grove, with a camp every summer, which the high rollers of the world, the presidents, the premiers, the billionaires, and so forth, they go to there, and they do some pretty nauseous stuff. But they also pretend that they're worshiping these idol gods. That is not pretend as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
In Washington, because of my own personal experience having sat this close to people that said they're witches and that they're influencing the government. I've said that in public, and I get lambasted all the time. They don't like me. But it's true. They have told me that. And they're in the center of our government, in our Congress. I know that because my mother worked there before she worked for Gene Dixon. I had friends that work on the Hill. I have in the bureaucracy. I know that. I recall being on a task force when I was still in uniform, and how we were oppressed spiritually because we were standing for truth and what God had told us to do, and yet the evil is so pervasive. They threatened to destroy me. You hear about that, but until it happens to you, you don't quite appreciate it.
Well, Bob, I just want to say I think that's one of the things that uniquely qualifies you, because you have spent years, you talk about being in Babylon with armed guards, and you just toss this stuff out like I got an email from President Trump. And what I'm trying to get the audience to realize, if they've not followed Bob's professional ministerial career, is he is not like the average civilian out there who is basically insulated from the day-to-day. But I know that he's not even at liberty to disclose all of the things I'm sure that you've seen and witnessed and watched perhaps on surveillance cameras and things like that you're unable to speak about. But what you are able to disclose, and what you've done a fascinating job putting together, is your new book, Out of This World: Are UFOs Aliens, Spirits, or Pure Hokum? And we've packaged this together right now with Tyler Gilreath's brand new book, Gate of the Gods, Revelation, the Messiah, and the Second Coming of Babylon. And we want to make sure that you know how you can get your copies of both of these incredible new works from Defender Publishing in the Out of This World and Gate of the Gods special offer. When you order this incredible offer from the SkyWatchTVstore.com, you'll receive the brand new book, Out of This World, Are UFOs Aliens, Spirits, or Pure Hokum by Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis, that exposes the faults in both the science and theology regarding the existence of UFOs. The very real possibility that UFOs are manned by extraterrestrial beings much smarter and far more spiritual than humans that are preparing to deceive mankind as we approach the biblical end times. The recent surge of UFO activity all around the globe, and why Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis is calling for Project UFO, a national strategy to determine if we face an existential threat, and so much more. But that's not all. You'll also receive Gate of the Gods, Revelation, the Messiah, and the Second Coming of Babylon by Tyler Gilreath, that brings to life the war between Jesus Christ and the power of darkness as illuminated in the book of Revelation. A cosmic end-time struggle between the Hebrew king of promise and the Old Testament gods of Babylon. The hidden Babylonian framework in the book of Revelation that can only be seen through ancient Near Eastern eyes. Unmasking Babylon the Great, and more. Also included in this must-have special offer for a very limited time, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis' best-selling book, Give Me Liberty, Not Marxism, and his book, Kings of the East, China's Plan to Eliminate America and Impose a Communist World Order. All of these items hold a retail value of $84. Yours now for your donation of only $45, which includes free shipping to all U.S. orders. So don't delay. You can scan the QR code on your screen using the camera app on your phone for instant access to this special opportunity. You can also visit us at SkyWatchTVstore.com or call 1-844-750-4985 and ask for the Out of This World and Gate of the Gods special offer right now. It's an unbelievable special opportunity. It's not one that you're going to want to miss. Bob, with just a few minutes left on the clock, I think it's important to tie something in here. If you're watching this program and perhaps you're a pastor of a church, or you lead a small Bible study, or just the advocate of your own home, a father, a mother, raising children, and maybe this whole idea that the Bible deals with a subject like the potential of aliens or unidentified objects, and you find that curious because maybe you've been told the Bible doesn't specifically deal with this topic, it's a bit esoteric, it's kind of open to your imagination. You can take the idea of an alien and maybe interswap it for a spirit, but generically we're not going to deal with it from the pulpit, and it just stays this ambiguous loop that's fleeting and difficult to cipher. This is something that you deal with, this question, in your brand new book, Out of This World. What, if anything, does the Bible offer to believers or people fascinated by this subject in terms of an explanation for the existence of something like aliens or UFOs, even if those words aren't necessarily specifically used?
Yeah, well, you have Elijah, obviously, and the chariots of fire, Ezekiel. You have a whole series of demonic possessions, which arguably are demons and not aliens. But if you were in that boat with Jesus when he crossed the Sea of Galilee and he went ashore and he saw these wild people, you would call them aliens, but they were demonically possessed. So disembodied spirits from arguably, I would say, a Nephilim background have jumped into their bodies. And interestingly, a Library of Congress actually has a study they did on that, and they concluded that perhaps what we're seeing today is demonic or others. And it's in the book. The angels meet people face to face. Angels eat meals with human beings. This is all in the Bible. They physically grabbed Lot and pulled him back. Jacob wrestled with an angel. They came to Jesus in Matthew 4 and ministered to him after he was in the desert. They appear and they speak many, many times. They even, knocked, down the apostle in Acts, open doors. They do things that, you don't understand. And yet, this world would say they really are aliens. Billy Graham wrote a book 50 years ago. I picked it up when I was a young lieutenant in the Army on angels. And it's fascinating because it said many of these same sorts of things. Why aren't we aware of the spiritual dimension around us? It's so real, and yet we tend to be blinded. Demonic possession today, I think, is real. I think we have some key leaders in the world. I would go as far as to say that there are people in the Kremlin that might have a pet demon. There are some in Beijing that I think probably are inspired in that way. Certainly in Tehran, and North Korea isn't out of its grasp either.
Sure.
And a lot of the evil that's going on in our world, I'm not necessarily saying they're all demon-possessed, but they're influenced, because I've seen it in Washington.
And that leads me to my next question. I think people are really fascinated by the prospect, and they want to know the answers to why governments of the world hide this information. They both aggregate video footage and the testimonials of those that have been claimed to be either possessed or suppressed at night or abducted or visited. But yet, there does seem to be a continued, decade after decade, effort to suppress, silence, conceal. Why is it? And I'll give you one example. So the AARO report, which basically AARO, it stands for All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. Where they come up with these titles is beyond me. But they have claims about the allegations that the United States government is reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology and hiding it from the public. At this point, you almost think you could leak anything, and people are so immune to this type of reveal that it would have no effect. Why are they still concealing and suppressing?
Well, arguably, they will say, we don't suppress information. All we do is report on the facts. Having written documents, not all that different than this. You know, you write what your boss wants you to write. Now, I don't know, because I wasn't in this task force, but I've served in many task forces, to include, the present time, which I don't talk about. This is the first of 2 volumes. They look back in history. They look at 20 different organizations that have been stood up, and the names keep changing. So you can deny some of this. Do they have biologics? They say no. Do they have spacecraft? They say no. They only use the word paranormal once in this 66-page volume. They will not address the things that I'm concerned about, and that's the spiritual aspect of what this is really manifesting. However, when you talk to the actual people that made these sightings, some will use the word demonic. The things that I just went through, out of the Bible, it fits that scenario so well. And yet, we as a U.S. government will not say that, because, separation of church and state, that's not something we're going to do. I don't dismiss the study, because just about everything in here I said in that book.
Sure.
But that's only 60 pages of evidence. You've got to look at that. And I was fascinated that they found things I did, but they completely absolutely miss this whole spiritual aspect. And they dismiss that outright, which is tragically wrong, but that's what government does. And across the world, the same thing. The Brits had a field marshal, actually, the guy in charge of World War II, and they talked about, these spirits taking over flying airplanes, and I talk about that in here. They talked about seeing demonic spirits and so forth. Now, this is some public testimony. You probably are not going to hear that on, CNN, but it's what they said in their own testimony. Certainly, the Australians have done it. The Chinese, they've done some, but the Chinese aren't going to release anything. The Russians had a great inventory of very hard to explain things. But once again, having spent some time in Russia and having dealt with some of their spiritual stuff, because I've gone to conferences with these guys in these long dark robes and high hats and so forth, I'm convinced that they don't know the same God that I know. That they're representing something that I think is unfortunately wrong.
Oh my goodness.
Right.
Can I jump in here, Bob? I have some questions, too, from an outsider perspective. I've been watching, like all of you, kind of what's been unfolding. And it seems like now more than ever, you have members of Congress who are trying to take the ball down the field. You have members like Tim Burkett from the state of Tennessee.
Eric Burleson, our congressman right here.
In Missouri.
Yeah.
And so how are they being treated and viewed within the government?
I'm trying to put together the right words to say. Governments are political. I know that's an obvious statement. However, because I work with some of these political people, they will not allow you to do and say certain things or write certain things.
Oh, for sure.
They definitely influence how those decisions come out of the bureaucracy. Look at Homeland Security and how this guy can be impeached, and yet he says, "Oh, the border's not open." So can they lie? Yes. Government does lie to the people, and it lies to Congress. Even though Congress can go and say, please answer my question, they ignore it. If they can get away with ignoring it, they will ignore it.
And they tell them they don't have the clearance to know the information. Maybe the Gang of Eight may know more than the average congressman or woman, but they're definitely getting some pushback.
Behind all of that is the deep state, the ones that are not elected, and they continue administration after administration running things.
Little do you know.
Yeah, and when there is information that gets out about people in the government who perhaps have a supernatural understanding of the phenomenon.
Yes.
About 15 years ago, Nick Redfern wrote the book Final
Yes.
Events, where he wrote about a group inside government, allegedly nicknamed the Collins Elite, that determined that the UFO phenomenon was demonic, but that the solution to this would be to impose Mosaic law on the United States, as if that would somehow protect our souls against these soul-sucking demonic UFOs.
And then
I
covered
think
that
that
the
was,
Collins Elite were
right. No, I think that was, if the Collins Elite even exists, I think that was just a disinformation campaign to make Christians appear as though we want to take over the world.
If it existed. We create all sorts of task forces internally, and because everything's locked in a SCIF, which is a classified area, you can't just arbitrarily walk in and ask questions. You don't do that.
You can't?
I can't do that either. I have to have a contact that comes out and takes me in, and then I get to interface with them. So, yes, that does happen. The message that goes out, is politically correct to whoever is in charge. And don't believe that the generals and the admirals aren't politicians.
Oh, yeah.
They get promoted or don't get promoted based upon whether or not they're working for that secretary or that whomever. And because I can't say much more, but I deal with that every day.
I would say that on this topic, as with most of the things that affect our daily lives, there is really no separation of church and state. It's just the definition of church is unilaterally applied to the followers of Jesus Christ. There is another church out there that is pushing its religion on the rest of us, and boy, they enforce their blasphemy laws more intensely than the Spanish Inquisition ever did.
Well, just like the DEI emails
Yes.
I get inviting me to go to, these luncheons that are government time luncheons, and they're going to spout this nonsense. That's very typical. But once again, those are political decisions that infiltrate into the core of the bureaucracies. And if you're not abiding by the core's bureaucracies' mandates, you aren't going to stay around long.
Well, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have to pause this conversation for today, but don't miss next week when our guests return to talk about whether or not people within the ancient world reported sightings of UFOs and the ancient roots of this phenomenon. For everybody here in studio, all of our guests, Tyler and Bob, thank you so much for joining us again this week. I'm Joe Artis Horn. Keep your eyes on the prize, which is Jesus Christ. We'll be back.